And we are live. Welcome to the latest and maybe greatest, we don't know yet, episode of the FreudenFreude podcast, where we bring you content to help you grow and develop as a person and as a leader.
I am Sandra Corona,
And I am
and
Claudia,
we
and we
and we
are
are
coaches.
coaches.
Yes, we are coaches. You should try it sometime to do like a synchronized thing like that. With the lag inherent in Zoom and things like that, it's not necessarily that easy to do. Um,
No,
so go ahead.
no. Okay, well, I am. So I'm trying to focus. I'm thinking, no, don't worry about it. Blah blah blah. I am a coach for young professionals, for the neurodiverse community, and for uprising leaders.
And I am a professional coach for, well, professionals, corporate leaders, as well as their teams in tech and beyond. So today's topic actually came up kind of maybe as a topic of interest in our last week's session, where in the end we said maybe at some point we should talk about it, and
Mhm.
here we are. We decided to squeeze it right in, and what it is the what I entitled the grief of change, or rather a grief that is associated with a change process.
Mhm.
And, we are all very familiar with grief when a loved one passes away or somebody that we knew. Obviously, losing a person is a very dramatic, sometimes traumatic change. And we kind of expect that we go through this grief process, that we don't just like say, okay, check mark, and we bounce right back. It doesn't work that way. And I think most of us have experienced it, unfortunately, at least once. And so maybe we should, before we even continue, unless you want to give a brief introduction, actually look at what a grief process like that would look like. What's your take?
So, I was thinking about my own experiences, and I was thinking about how everything that we go through is something that we're going to either keep us living in the past or keep us living in the present, but without going forward. So there's never an intention to look into the future. There's no desire to say, oh, I have this, going for me. So therefore I have something to look forward to. You can have many great things going for you. But if you're stuck in your emotions, in your, like Claudia was saying, in your traumas, uh, yes, it's going to become something very difficult for you to focus and see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Because unfortunately, it seems like a lot of what keeps us in the past is a sense of regret.
Mm-hmm.
Regretting not having done things, regretting not having done things differently, not having said things that needed to be said, maybe not even enjoyable parts of your life to the full extent that enjoyment could have lasted. It's usually these ruminations about the past, about things that decisions that were made, experiences that came up, trauma, and so on. So it's not very often not really a productive state to be in, because not only does it rob you of your future focus and your agency to build and nurture a potential future, but even it robs you of the sense of the now, of actually being alive, of enjoying the true richness of the current moment. So and not properly dealing or accepting grief, I think, is one of the things that sometimes keep us stuck, because we don't come to this closure. We do not come to this point of acceptance and moving forward. So
Right.
So, those who have had some interest in this might have heard of a model that was developed by Kübler-Ross. And it's called very often the grief cycle or the 5 stages of grief. Some have actually refined it into 7, 9, 11 stages and so on. But there's essentially 5 main stages. And let me just do a very quickie screen share here, and let me see if I can just grab my viewer here. So the Kübler-Ross grief cycle very often starts, and I hope that it's going to come up. Let me see. Yes, I'm checking the YouTube stream on my other screen here. So Kübler-Ross, the very first thing when the change happens, especially if it was an unexpected change, like something that just happened, an accident, somebody got sick, you got laid off, whatever the change is, the first thing is just shell shock. And, sometimes this phase of initial denial can actually go on for quite a while. You just can't believe it. Your brain cannot actually, even fathom the possibility that that's real, that that is happening. You're just waiting to wake up from bad nightmare or something like that. It doesn't really sink in. And then once you kind of come to grips that that might actually be your reality, you really you go into this phase of anger and depression. I think that you get kind of stuck in the cycle there for a while. Sometimes you're angry and then you get depressed and then you go back to being angry and you go back to being depressed. And while these emotions run high, there's a little bit of this bargaining that goes on already. You try to like rationalize and just there's this little bit of cognitive thing happening, but mostly you're just stuck in an emotional cycle. And it's only over time as this resolves and embeds a little bit that you go and the bargaining is becoming stronger. You're figuring things out and then slowly moving into this acceptance stage, which means that, yes, okay, so I accept that this is my new reality. And the next step, I as a coach obviously would really think that the next step would be, okay, so given that this is my new reality, what am I going to do now? How am I going to shape the future given that my context has changed? Did you want to say a couple words to the model that I might have missed, Sandra?
Oh, I mean, I was just thinking more about examples and how this is not associated exclusively to losing a person, but it
Right.
is associated with even losing a charm, losing a heirloom, right? Uh, Losing a job, a title, being demoted, right? There's many things that you can go through, even not getting the bid or not getting the house that you wanted, not uh not getting the candy that you want. It's just really something special.
Right. And I would actually generalize it even further and saying it doesn't need to have to do with something that you lose. It's any kind of change.
Loss.
Okay. Because I mean, it can even be like you have a good option and you have a very good option, and any of these great options happen, you will have a change. And so
Amen.
this is the way that I see it. Our brain operates on its own perception of the world. And in coaching and psychology, we often call that the internal model. That kind of is our representation of the world and how we live in it. And this internal model, it comes from the theory of constructivism and things like that for those who want to learn a little bit more. But this particular model has a set of rules that make sense. You know, your rules might be different from my rules, but my rules in their entirety make sense, meaning they just kind of fit. Okay, your rules that might be slightly different also fit. Okay, so as a set, these rules fit. If we have change, any kind of change, those rules need to readjust, meaning that model needs to take in this change and rewire itself essentially to make sense again. Like, how does my world now, after I lose this job, for instance, make sense? How does my world, now that I got promoted, a positive change, make sense? How do I live in it? What has changed? And so on. So you see that this internal thing needs to change. So given that the new rules need to form means that old rules got lost. And that's the sense of loss, meaning the old references, the old fixed points, the old sense-making rules have to be broken in order for these new ones to
Yes.
do. And in this work of shifting from an old set of rules to a new set of rules, for whatever external change reason, positive or negative, it requires the brain to do this work, and this emotional upheaval and this sense making stage of bargaining and this acceptance and so on is just a way that our body, our brain needs to work through this shifting, through this
Mhm.
shift. So we call it grief, but you know, extend it a little bit as kind of this rewiring, this reharmonizing of the internal model. And so anything, and that's for me the big message of today's show, any change will destabilize.
Mhm.
Any change, even good change, is going to destabilize. And when we are kind of in this destabilized, maybe semi-fragile state, we kind of need to be a bit patient
Mhm.
and you know, practice some self-care and just realize that that is actually what's happening, that we just need some time to put all this back into order.
Right. You know, you said very important things. I think one of them that came to mind was, for example, how external factors we cannot we cannot avoid external factors, right? That is one part of change. And when we experience change, I think one of the biggest part about the bargaining is how do I control it? I think that's where the bargaining comes in, right? Where you try to control it, where anxiety comes in because something has is no longer in your control. And you cannot, you want to run out, you want to run away. You feel like, where's the out from this situation? And I learned this the other day about anxiety. It was so interesting to find out that anxiety is that that action where you're trying to escape something, where you have lost control over something. And I was like, oh, that is so true. So if that makes sense to you, you know, you can kind of understand what you're going through and what have you done, because this is the other part, that problem with grief and how people don't know how to grieve because it's still a taboo, right? And since we're not giving the opportunity to grieve in a certain normal time, uh, people don't know how to manage it, and they're constantly going in this internal loop of what has gone wrong. What didn't I do? Instead of looking, what did I do for this person? What did I get to do with this person? Right? And like you were saying, most of the grief is due to the things that you couldn't achieve or do with the person, with the job, with the thing, with whatever situation you were experiencing. And this, you know what came to mind? It was even a situation when you're choosing, like when you're in the traffic, you're stuck in traffic and you decide, should I continue on the same line or should I go right, right? And when you take the decision of going right, what is it? What do you see? That the line starts moving. You're like, shoot, I should have stayed. And then you start regretting that now you're going to arrive late to the office. You should have not taken that option, blah, blah. I mean, those small decisions, those every single day decisions are grief. And we just didn't notice them. And that's why we don't know how to control them. And that's why sometimes we lose control and we get so upset, because we have to learn to go through the process of these emotions.
And just let it be. And I think that
Yes.
you mentioned something really interesting. I think that bears repeating, is that this is on a very large temporal scale, right? I mean, some processes are just in the moment or minutes. Others are days or weeks, but sometimes it's months or years. Okay, so it really depends on the change,
Mm-hmm.
and so just I think that it starts like so many things in life with awareness. Like when you're feeling down, or when you have a sense of anxiety, or when you're feeling angry and you can't really put your finger on it, even just realizing that, oh, I went through this upheaval last week, or I went through this change at work, maybe the company gets acquired, or whatever it may be, small or large, that then at least you realize, oh, okay, I'm not going out of my mind, right? There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you are learning or you're digesting this change. Maybe that's also a way to put it. And digesting change sometimes leads to a stomach ache. I mean, that's just the way that it is.
The body reacts. That's
Right, the
true.
body reacts, and everybody also reacts differently to the same change in circumstances. Imagine you're
Mm.
a team, and let's say a project gets cancelled, right? A major change. There's maybe then also some uncertainty about what your next job assignment will be within the company, or if you even will have a job.
Mm.
Major stress. Well, guess what? You might be in a team of 8 and you get 8 vastly different responses to this change of circumstance. Some might be very compartmentalized and just taking it in stride, versus others, going through this really deep, change process, or grief process. So and there's no right or wrong. It just is, because some people might be triggered more than others. Some people's external circumstances might be very different from yours. Culturally, there's obviously very big differences about how to deal with certain things. And then also, I think, learned resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a more resilient person, you can, I think, take it a bit more in stride than when you're somebody who hasn't learned resilient coping mechanisms and so on. So I really think that there's there's a vast gamut of possible reactions in time and in intensity. And again, we it's not that we should judge this, it's that we should just see it for what it is and allow this thing to happen. Allow
Yes.
this thing to happen.
Yes.
Uh,
Correct.
and this also then speaks, if somebody were to come to you, Sandra, and say, well, my friend is going through this major grief process, what kind of, what would you tell that person on how to support his or her friend at that moment?
Thank you for asking because this is my thing. So, as a thanatologist, which is the study of life and death, one of the things that we learned was that friends just sometimes need you to be there and just be there to give them a glass of water, hand them the Kleenex, right? Feed them, prepare some food, get them to shower because there's things that you're going to go through, and friends, true good friends, are going to be there no matter what. And I experienced that many, many years ago. And I am so thankful to my best friend for being there for me. Uh, so when I heard about this simple act of kindness from your friends, it makes a huge world of a difference. Yes. Then another thing that I do, that I always suggest as well is, say, for example, you lost your job, right? And you're now going through the process of what am I going to do, this and that. But mostly you lost your job because the position was eliminated. So you were in a way demoted. You've lost that position of power. Let's keep in mind that power is also a process of loss, right? When you have the autonomy to make decisions, and losing that opportunity, it is grief, right? You cannot, you don't know how to handle it. So this is what I tell people. I tell people to grab the object that is related, and this is applicable for any kind of grief. You grab an object that represents your job and you hold on to it, but you have to hold on to it every single day. And I quote this and you'll understand why. Eventually, it becomes exhausting to hold on to it. Yes, because this is where you're going to place all your emotions. This is where now you finally have something where to put your, like, it's like a little imaginary box where all your grief is sucked in, right? Instead of putting it out there to the world, which is different because it's I don't know how to explain it. And then with that object being here present, representing the job, the loss of that job, now you have a place where to grieve. So then eventually you're going to start putting it on the table next to you. And then you're going to remember, you're going to go and pick it up, right? But eventually you're going to start leaving it, I don't know, on the counter, on the kitchen, in the living room, in your bedroom, and you're going to start forgetting. Grief is, thank goodness, grief is something that you can let go, but there is the chronic grief. So that was one of the things that I suggest, right? Like getting an object where you can place all your grief into. But I wanted to talk about chronic grief.
Can we just hold on to that thought? Yeah, it's from a psychological thing, and also in coaching, it very often helps to externalize something and to use a symbolic object or
Mm.
representation of what we're talking about, because it makes a world of difference really to talk about my grief, my grief versus disgrief. Do you
Mm-hmm.
understand? This object representing the grief. So externalizing can be a very, very big step. Okay, and and then whatever mechanism this takes, and even before we jump into talking about chronic grief, some people also find that journaling helps, right? In the beginning, it might be a lot and very deep and every
Yeah.
day or several
Yep.
times a day, but then over time, it kind of finds its place because thankfully, in most cases, this is something that will abed maybe it does never really go away completely, but it will become less and less in a typical case. So talk a bit about chronic grief then. What's your experience, or what have you learned?
Yeah, so like I was saying, it's chronic grief. What I've experienced is, again, it is when you are not able and you don't have the tools to manage grief. And you go into this probably 1 year. I mean, they say that if you experience grief for more than a month, then it already becomes chronic grief. But I don't agree with it. I think, like you were saying before, we don't know the situation that a person is experiencing, how their external factors are, where they're living, what are their issues, etc., etc. So I do not agree with that idea, but I do agree that anything that goes beyond 6 months to a year does become chronic, because again, that means that you have not been able to cope and you have not been taught how to manage it. Um, Chronic grief is usually handled by creating a some kind of ritual. Okay, this is something that I learned, and it's, you put like this beautiful representation of all the things that the person liked, all the things that you like to do with the person. So you start creating like this little altar, right? You can put it on a table, you can put it anywhere, anywhere where you can see it. It's almost exactly the same like an object that I was telling before, but this becomes a little bit magical because you get to turn on the candle and you get to say, speak to it. It's like going to the cemetery, right? And but it's here, the representation is here. So you get to talk to it. You start, when you talk about it, that's the key word. When you talk about it, it starts feeling so much better. It's what you hold in that makes it chronic. The I don't want people to see me. I don't want people to see how it hurts. And you start faking, you start pretending, and then it becomes exhausting. So, besides it being sad, it's exhausting. It is something that you cannot handle. And that is why so many people cannot get out of bed, because they are tired
Hmm.
of pretending. So,
Right.
yeah, this
Especially,
is how I learned about chronic grief.
yeah, and especially if being a person that is grieving becomes part of your identity.
Yeah.
We would prefer that not to happen, right? I mean, you should be a person who can, cherish life with the memory of whatever has happened before and is no longer. So it really, and you said it as well, it depends on the intensity that it still has after a time, because I think that it's all right if you if you still grieve the loss of your loved one, even 2 3 years later, but it shouldn't be in an intense fashion every day and so on. I mean, nobody can tell you it's not okay to, become maybe a touch nostalgic when you think about the person. Maybe you're still living in the same house and, things just happen to remind you and so on. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it becomes such that it is, like you said, exhausting, or that you feel you have to fake it, or it's just preoccupying you to a large degree, then maybe you should seek some help. And I think that there's a lot that can be done, and there's actually trained grief counselors out there, for
That's
those who
correct.
might need a little bit of extra help.
Right.
Maybe you will allow me just to give another example that is
Sure.
not related to the loss of a person.
Mm.
I had actually, I was supposed to start coaching a gentleman who was supposed to go into retirement in about a year. Okay. taking retirement is also a huge life change, okay, and especially if he was quite a high powered executive, really at the top of his career, a lot of responsibility and so on, and that was going to go away. And this gentleman was so had so much clarity, at least, that he said, okay, maybe I should think about this before it happens, and
Mm-hmm.
realize what happens. But then, unfortunately, the company got acquired and he was made redundant quite quickly. Of course, this thing that happened was that this was now kind of an early retirement thing. Not very
Yes.
much early, but just a number of months early. But
Mm-hmm.
needless to say, this gentleman all of a sudden was retired. Speaking of which, I mean, spinning your wheels, the
Mm.
denial was very clear. The anger, the depression was very clear, and to deal with that, because it's you lose so much of your reference, the going into the job, the having the people to talk to and supervise and mentor and lead. The financials had changed. All of a sudden he was home with his wife more. Speaking of, a complete like reversal of things, from always being at the office, or a lot at the office, now being home all the time. It is such a huge change. And until you come to, because there's the grief of losing the job, but there's also the work that needs to be done to find a new balance, to find a new equilibrium now with the changed context. And sometimes the grief can't really end until you have figured out what to do now. See, it's like it's beyond, because in the Kübler-Ross model, the last thing is acceptance. But accepting that the job is no longer there, for me, I think is not really necessarily the end. You're only going to be able to put this thing to bed, I think, when you have found a new steady state, when you have found a new way of existing, when your brain finally has found its new way of being and thinking, and you can, okay, right, when that happens, then I think the grief cycle comes to an end. So I would probably extend it until you have found your new thing. And it is real, people. This is not something that you can just say, okay, retired, and now, and now what? Right. And so it can take a while, even for people that, like this gentleman, yeah, had invested a lot in uh, personal development. He was already quite self-reflected. He knew himself really quite well. He had also a financial level that he had choices,
Mm.
right? I mean, he
Okay.
he could still figure out what to do, and in the end, he actually started a small business and things like that, which for him made sense. But the you see that is grief. This like spinning your wheels and figuring things out and going through this emotional turmoil sometimes, until you settle in. It's grief. It's grief.
Yes. Correct. Wow. That is hard. Um, you
So
know, one
actually,
of
parenthesis there, for anybody who is approaching retirement, try to think about it beforehand. It's, don't just like the week before the date of your retirement that say, okay, so what am I going to do next week? But the more you can get to know yourself better, and maybe plan for that and plan for the transition, the smoother it's going to go. And I think at the very least your spouse might actually appreciate that as well.
Yes, exactly. Having something else to do other than to just be sitting down on the couch and watching TV is
Mm.
not something that a wife wants to see their husband do, right? You're
Right, of
used to
course.
you're used
I
to
would,
him being active and doing
right,
things, and
right, right.
suddenly he's a couch potato. It hurts.
Well, I mean, I think we can all agree on like, I don't know, 3 weeks of binge watching television,
Yes,
right? I mean,
yes, yes.
go on vacation, do a complete disconnect, but realize that your life has not ended and
Yeah.
that you still can be useful and contribute and just have fun, right? Find ways that
Hmm.
you can fulfill yourself, find a sense of fulfillment.
Yes, correct. Speaking of that, having something to make sense that will fulfill you, that is the future. That is something to look forward to. I have also done the same thing as I'm going through this move that is now 4 months away. Oh my God, 4 months away. It's incredible. But anyways, um, what I've done is that I felt I didn't have a reason or something that inspired me to say, "Yay, I'm going back home," right? I didn't find the purpose because I had here my friends. I have here my friends. I have here, I've made a life in a certain way. And now going back, it feels like I'm being pushed to having to make that decision, right? But anyways, as by not having something to focus on, I just wasn't finding meaning. And then suddenly my husband started moving and we started looking into houses, and I started the process. Like, you have to start somewhere, right? And now we're looking into buying a house, and we found a house. And so now it's like just a matter of the people accepting our bid, and we're just waiting now. Now it's like this excitement. So it is very true that you have to prepare for change. You have to have something to look forward to, right? But not constantly be looking at that, because then you're just living in the future. But something that gives you meaning, something that excites you, something that makes you happy. And I can remember how many times many expats, when the company was getting ready to retire them, they reached out, the company would reach out to the employee 3 years before their time to retire. And they would offer them a early retirement package, or they would allow them to do the process of retiring and coming back to the US, but it would be a transition, right? It would feel like, okay, now it's time for you to start passing on your role to somebody else, all of these things that happen with changes. And so I still saw that because they didn't have anything to look forward to other than to come back home, I would receive calls, people telling me, well, I don't have anything else to do, so I might as well just handle this. So you would feel how sour the person was, how much pain there was to realize that they had no longer a purpose.
Right.
That's kind of hard.
It's hard because I think especially a lot of people often derive meaning from their contribution in the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
from being the breadwinner for their family, of what that
Yep.
allows them to do. It's where they find a lot of their intellectual stimulation and so
Mm-hmm.
on. If that then changes, they can definitely grieve the loss of that. Like, how do I contribute? How do I feel good about myself? Right?
Yes.
And so a flip side to look at that is that, yes, one thing is going away, but does that, what doors do open? Right? What doors open?
Exactly.
Your skill set is not going to go away. Your
Mm-hmm.
capabilities are not going to go away. Your richness of life experience is not going to go away. So how can you channel that now, given that, for instance, you have more time, or
Mm-hmm.
given that now you are going to a different location, and therefore also bring your cultural expat, for instance, knowledge with you into that new location, and so on, to continue an example that you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, just looking at all these different options. As a coach, this kind of exploring or helping the client to explore these different options and look at this same situation and context switch, from different perspectives is kind of part of the work. And I think that sometimes some people need a coach. I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's so hugely helpful to have a neutral third party that has your best intentions at heart, that comes well intentioned into this, but in order to support you, will give you the space to explore this and also explore it in a maybe more solution focused way, in a more positive way, because the danger of a change that you perceive as negative, meaning something is taken away from you or you're being in some shape or fashion diminished, like for instance going into retirement, losing a job,
Mm-hmm.
getting divorced, whatever it is, right? So there's this negative affect that you're going to simmer in. It's very tricky if you're just left to your own devices to turn that around into something that that you can create something positive from. You're going to feel challenged to feel resourced or
Mm-hmm.
resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, having a coach is really helpful. And I think more practical than a therapist. But that's my own personal stance on it. People, I might be biased in this thing, but it's very, very practical, very future oriented. Sometimes it doesn't take months and months. Even a few sessions with a competent coach can make a huge difference. And so just consider that a coach, among other counseling professions and things like that, might just be the kind of professional that can help you to deal with the grief of change. Yeah.
You mentioned something that I think it's also important that we stress. We were talking about going to counseling or being a part of a group or something like that. I think that it's very important that we emphasize how important it is for there to be a counselor or a coach or a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever it is. There has to be somebody present to help you manage that event that you're going through, that traumatic, stressful, whatever you want to call it, change that you're going through. Otherwise, all you're going to do is just go around in circles and hearing other people, just like you were saying, like we were talking last week, just a bitch fest. It's just going to be going on and on and on and on. It's not going to end.
And
So,
rather
yes.
than lifting you up, it's actually going to suck you further down. That
Yes.
it's even so much worse than what you thought, and so on. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
you need somebody who's trained,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to kind of create a space of that is more positive. I mean, nobody's gonna be there with a whip, making you do things. That's not the point of this. But creating a space where solutions and possibilities are also present,
Mm-hmm.
right? A
Mm-hmm.
state of resourcefulness and nevertheless support, because yeah, everybody is allowed to cry, but it shouldn't be a cry fest, 24/7.
Yeah.
And some support groups, unfortunately, are like that. It's the woe me kind of thing, and three people cry louder than one, and so on. So it's just be mindful that if you look for a group, support group or whatever, to help you deal with this, that there's somebody there that can kind of hold the space and help you through that. Good point. Good point.
Speaking of this, also, let's remember something. And this is where that saying or that phrase that says, be kind to others because you never know what they're going through, right? Maybe their anger, their bitterness, or whatever it is that you see that that person is just exuding. You never know if it has anything to do with them losing somebody or something or whatever it is, but it's always a change. So there's you won't lose anything by simply letting the person be and just ignoring, because sometimes you cannot help a person. That's another thing. Don't put yourself in a situation where you want to help somebody because you heard somebody say, oh, this is what you need to do for people that are grieving. Don't do that. Just let it be, let it go, and let the person be who they need to be at that moment, because it's a need to be like that in that moment.
And
So yeah, help that person
exactly.
by letting go.
It's I think it's just the universal thing of giving people the benefit of the doubt. If your colleague at work all of a sudden snaps at you for no good reason,
Mm,
just realize that there might very well be a reason, except it has nothing to do with what was snapped about. Meaning it has nothing to do with you. The person might just be overwhelmed because of whatever else was going on in their life. For instance, the loss of a loved one, or family issues, or the kid is sick, or whatever. Right? That sometimes it just happens. Sometimes our fuses do get short when we're experiencing difficult times, or a loss. So I think that really really is just giving people the benefit of the doubt, and that maybe
right.
it doesn't have anything to do with me or
With
this report
you.
I just handed in or whatever, right? So that being said, I think that you also mentioned, what people tell you you should say. I think that as you are grieving or going through a thing like this, nothing is more exhausting than hearing everybody say the exact same platitudes. Right? I mean, that's just like sometimes, just if you support somebody, just support them, just be there, right?
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Come with a care package. I think that would be a lovely thing to do for somebody, because rarely ever does somebody come in with a care basket, with Kleenex, with, I don't know,
fluffy socks.
Visine for the eyes, so that they clarify, some chocolate, some ice cream, and it will brighten the day of that person, because again, those kind of things are beautiful details that are appreciated once the person also goes out of it, and they will remember that time with you. They will remember that dedication, that little detail that makes a huge difference.
Huge difference. Also, I think that if you don't know what to do, ask.
Mm, oh
What
yeah.
right now? How can I help you right now?
Hmm.
What do you need right now? How can I
Right,
support you right now?
right,
Right?
right.
It might be a hot cup of soup or hot
Yeah.
chocolate, right? It might just be being the gatekeeper and keeping everybody else away from the
Hmm.
house or the apartment.
Hmm.
Making a phone call, or just sitting there, or just getting the hell away too. Sorry, but sometimes people just need to also be left alone, and
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you necessarily leave the house, but you might leave the room and just give the people their
Give them
space.
space. Yeah.
So there's sometimes just silence is good enough. Just a presence is good enough, and just saying, I am here for you. Whatever you need, I am here for you. Just reach out. And that, often is all that is needed. And then,
Hmm.
backing it up, of course, if the person asks you something, then do it as well, because, it's tough going. So I think, again, change is accompanied with a grief process. And we might not necessarily always realize that that's what we're going through, but this emotional up and down, this readjusting of things, this not quite knowing what and so on, like this state of accepting the state of solutionlessness. That's like one of my favorite things as well, is sometimes it's okay not to know or
Mm,
to not yet know. Okay, you don't need to come up with the solution in 3 minutes of thinking or 1 hour of thinking. It's okay to not know yet,
mm,
and to sit with that thing, giving it just a little bit of time.
yes.
And so I really think that giving it a bit of time, not forcing issues, and then finding out ways that you yourself like to replenish yourself. Some people like to take a bath. Others might want to go for a stroll in the woods.
Mhm.
What is it that you like to do to kind of refuel or calm down and so on? Do you prefer to be alone? Maybe more introverted people? Do you like to
Mhm.
have company? Maybe more extroverted people, and so on. Does music help? Doesn't it help? So, I mean,
Mhm.
even just exploring those things and maybe even exploring them beforehand, I really
Mm,
think it's good for everybody to know, like, how do I recharge my batteries?
yes.
Because, tough times always come at some point or another, right?
Yep.
Having this kind of list, mental or written down list of these are things I could do that I like to do or help me recuperate, would be a
Mhm.
good. What are
Yes.
things that you like to do, Sandra?
Oof. Um, the times that I've grieved, regardless of the situation, I live with the experience. I've learned to live with it. That is something that I was taught to do. And I cry. I let my emotions go. Um, but I also allow myself to laugh when I am experiencing something funny. Because here's another thing that happens when you're grieving. Your life continues, right? You still have to go to work, you still have to drive, you still sometimes have to go and see the girlfriends because they're worried about you, or they come and see you and they make you laugh, and something funny happens at the office. Your friends make you laugh, or you watch something nice in the car next to you, and you want to laugh, you want to smile, but something internally tells you not to do it because it would be wrong. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I've learned to give myself permission that even in grief, there are things that good things that have a purpose for them to happen at that moment. So if you need permission to do it, well, here's your permission. you
Percent.
know?
Exactly. Right, right. Because yeah, sometimes there's this very real thing of survivor's guilt,
Mm,
especially when the grief is associated with actually losing a person, right?
mm,
That person is no longer here, but I am, and you feel a little bit guilty sometimes, or feeling that you should be really sad now and forever that that person is not there anymore. And
mhm.
so I really think that there's a place for that, but there's also a place when that has to be mitigated and reduced, and life goes on. And
Yes.
a question that often gets asked is, what do you think this loved one would want for you? Would this loved one really want you to always remain sad and in this deep grieving stage, or would this person like for you to live on happily and live a fulfilled life? So
Yes.
but again, you know, every kind of change needs this kind of rewiring. And sometimes it can really throw us for a loop. And so there's help available. As coaches, we have dealt with people trying to find a new steady state
Mhm.
after a big change, whatever it may be. And I actually have experienced it that people just used gave it time to settle all this and things like that, but then actually found it as a springboard into different things and got excited about things, right? Like, for instance, weirdly enough, but a change, a promotion at work can bring on a grief process because the kind of work that you have done before you're no longer doing.
Mhm.
And how many people, when they get promoted, let's say to an executive position, still hold on to like the managerial duties that they had before? They can't release it and let the successor of that position deal with it because it has become so much part of their identity, and they not so much other people that they have to say no to, but themselves they have to say no to. That's no longer my job. My job now is to be the executive here and have a different role and different responsibilities and so on. Well, that too, it's like this it's such a fundamentally positive thing to get promoted and being able to contribute on a larger scale and a more far-reaching scale. But there might be a touch of feeling down, feeling blue. There's some anxiety because maybe you do not know exactly how to go about
Mhm.
doing your new job.
Yeah.
There might be, how do I deal with the envy of some other people and maybe some political backstabbing, like
Yeah.
all this kind of anxiety. It's part of this grief process of trying to bargain and find your new role in this new position, then to finally accept, and make decisions. Most of all, I think a lot of it has to do with decision making, and it is not always straightforward because you are in a fragilized state. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So what else would you say now, maybe to conclude the session, because we did fill the hour again. It's really crazy.
Yes. Mm, I think what I would like for people to do is to reach out to like you were saying before, reach out to a grief doula. There's, or like you said, a coach. There's grief coaches. There is, or a competent coach, like also you were saying. Um, it's important that you get the support that you need. And if you need to be heard, then be heard, listen, I'm sorry, talk, and find somebody that will hear you.
Right.
So don't go at it alone.
Right. Right. Be kind to yourself, and
Mhm.
if you feel you need it, seek help.
Mhm.
And uh, there's some, people out there that can definitely help you. And yes, very, sometimes the best friend is not the best helper in that situation,
That's
as
right.
well intentioned as they are, as well
Yes.
intentioned as they are. And so just you have options, and so that is maybe where we are going to wrap it up. uh,
Yes.
before I say, I just want to say that the image that I showed on the screen before, the 5 stages of the Kübler-Ross grief cycle, was from a blog at digitalnexa.com by Jean-Baptiste Coe, Coehl, and I just found it by doing a Google image search. There's plenty of them there. So thank you, Jean-Baptiste, for letting us, show your image. So if thank you first of all, everybody, for listening to us,
Yes.
and we hope that you found some value in this episode. It was certainly fun and interesting to think about these things.
Yes.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel. Give us any kind of engagement, a like or a comment, and we would love to hear from you. We are also available to work as coaches. You will find our contact information attached to these videos. You can reach out to us on any of our social medias or, in the using the information provided.
Mhm.
And we will be back with plenty more next week.
Yes.
We have quite an interesting calendar lined up
Yes.
for the rest of the year, so we are looking forward to that. And
Yes.
this was fun. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Claudia. It was nice to talk with you.
Yes. Okay, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.